And thank you. So for those of you who need to leave, as I say, I will hopefully about another 15 or 20 minutes that the chief, there's some questions that people have asked that we weren't able to get to. So let's jump right into it. One of the issues that people often talk about in Walnut Creek and statewide is cannabis. And let's just talk about from a policing perspective. So we don't have a retail outlet in Walnut Creek. At some point we might. A number of people think we should. But can you just discuss from your perspective, perhaps your views on retail cannabis? I don't know if Rockland, Nevada or San Leandro had such a thing, but talk about the issues in Walnut Creek and what we might expect if in fact we had retail.
Sure. So San Leandro has 2 dispensaries, technically 3, but the third one isn't really up and running. The calls for service that I saw in San Leandro were relatively low, usually alarm calls, but May 31st kind of changed everything. There was a couple of attempts on takeover robberies at one of the dispensaries in town. So there's always that propensity for usually more of a violent burglary. I say violent because usually they're armed, because a lot of the dispensaries have armed guards inside as well. If you've been following the news over the last couple of months, Oakland has quite a few dispensaries in them. In fact, and I don't have all of the details on this, but a retired OPD captain was, I believe he's probably followed because he was driving a very nice car. Maybe he was coming from his dispensary, I don't know. But had got into that business and had 3 people who were armed, tried to rob him, and there was a shooting that occurred. So it's not without it, it's not without a criminal element, but if it's done the right way, it could be a potentially safe endeavor. So I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I do, I know that it's legalized and a lot of people want it, but it's not going to be, just a distribution warehouse for, software or electronics or something. You're talking about something that is in high demand, and there's also a clandestine operation outside of what is regulated and legal that still occurs, and that usually means that makes it an attractive thing for thieves when they can, do one break-in and potentially, walk away with thousands of dollars of product relatively easily. So I think if it's done the right way, and the right security is put into place, where it would be very difficult, almost impossible to break into the building, and that you also have, usually you don't see hardly any crime during business hours. Usually it's the break-ins after hours, but that's by a design of how they install these vestibules, where it's like a checkpoint where you'd have to come in and present your ID, check in with armed security, and then once you're cleared, then you can go back into the retail storefront. So there's not marijuana on display at the storefront for you to walk by on Broadway or Main Street to, I want to try that one. It's, you have to go in and check in. But so I kind of have mixed feelings about it. But it does have the potential to bring really violent crime. But it's still relatively new in some of these cities. By new, I mean just a couple of years. So I'd like to get my hands on more data and try to understand a little bit better what the crime trends are before I could make, any definitive, recommendation for security or whether or not this could be, a hazard for Walnut Creek.
That's interesting. You use that term data, and I do very much appreciate you and I'll let everyone know we had a meeting not too long ago. I just wanted to get to know the chief and ask some questions, and he's very data driven. And I think that's very important to really, instead of anecdotally or what we might hear on social media, what do the statistics actually say? How does this really work in the real world? I think that's very important. And having said that, I want to talk about sectors in Walnut Creek. We've always heard about, I know an officer in our sector, we have a community watch program we put together, and we always like to have him at our house and have some of our neighbors. But can you just talk to our audience about the sectors, and perhaps in your role as the chief now, how you're going to change things with respect to numbers of people and in sectors in Walnut Creek. That makes any sense at all.
It does, and I do have some experience with this. Once you have a sector boundary or a beat boundary, it's very difficult to change it. A lot of agencies are really adverse to looking at data and doing redoing your boundaries and everything, because it's a ton of work. But as your city grows and your demand for services change, you're almost remiss if you don't do that. So I don't know when Walnut Creek has done that. I don't think it's been done in a very long time, but I've done this at a previous agency. And even though it's a heavy lift, it's really important for you to get a better understanding of how you deploy your resources more equitably, so that you can respond quickly, and where it just is going to make you much more effective at your job. So we have 4 sectors in the city, and one of them is the downtown sector, but the way it's situated within 2 other sectors. So it's oftentimes not staffed. So in the grand scheme of things, there are 3 major sectors in the city, and with the 4th one being a smaller kind of overall downtown area. So I'm talking with my staff right now so that we can make a couple of goals moving forward on how we could analyze where we've been with crime, where crime is right now and calls for service, and where we think it's going to be, looking at major developments that might be coming, to reimagine what our beat structure would be. And I'd like to change it in a way that would give us more flexibility on the deployment of resources, where we would have more beats, but each officer would be assigned to 2 beats, not just 1. And that would give you flexibility. And a lot of people, it's a little outside of the box thinking, but it actually works better than just having a single beat, because then you're more flexible on how you deploy your staff. So we are looking at that. It might take us, 6 months to 9 months to realize that and actually change those beat boundaries. But I think that'll dovetail nicely into this extra staffing that we were given. But hopefully we can get some officers hired and out on solo patrol by that time, and we can deploy this new downtown beat that I'm interested in developing.
I see. Many people ask, what responsibilities do business owners share in protecting their property and preventing crime? And I'll say the question comes up because we've heard so much that people say walking into Safeway in downtown Walnut Creek, loading up a basket and just going out the door, and nobody doing anything. Not a smash and grab or anything, nothing violent, but just we're seeing that. We have a chamber member who owns a service station on Main Street who said people just regularly come in and, where do you keep your money? Where do you keep it? Of course, we certainly want to tell our citizens don't engage with people like that, but obviously calling the police is important.
Yeah, it is important, and we're seeing this. It's real common for companies and corporations to have broad overarching policies where if they don't have loss prevention, they don't expect employees to intervene or even call the police if they witness a crime, which is really a disservice because, one, it skews our numbers and we don't have a better understanding of how much crime is really in the city, but then that person isn't held accountable, so they're going to go do it again. And they're going to do it again, or maybe even do something even more brazen next time. So I really wish, to answer your question, from my perspective, their responsibility at a minimum is to call us and report that a crime is in progress so we can respond. Now, a lot of times what has happened, specifically with Safeway too, and we saw this in San Leandro, is they would call us on low-level shoplifts, usually food being stolen, but they would say things like, oh, but we don't want to prosecute, we're just letting you know. Well, then in the officer's mind, especially over the last 18 months, okay, I'm going to go potentially stop this person, potentially get into an altercation with this person over a property crime, which amounts to a misdemeanor, less than $950. And the victim of the crime, Safeway or another business, is telling me that they will not prosecute. Why would I even go to that call and put myself in that situation? So it's this catch-22, what's the right thing to do? It's an ethical dilemma. So, I mean, if we could encourage business owners and these companies to maybe look at their policies a little differently. And if they're a big shopping center and they have 30 employees, why can't you have one of those employees have specialized training for asset protection and to work with the police department to help curtail some of that crime, or at least be a great witness and be willing to prosecute? That's all we're asking, or that's what I'm asking. That's what I would like to see happen.